All right, I'm done. Appreciate it.
Okay, great. Thank you. And Linda, are we recording? Recording in progress. Okay, good. Then it is all yours, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Courtney. Welcome to the May 26, 2021 BAR Large Virtual Meeting. My name is John Robinson. The other board members present, or that will be present this afternoon, are Jay White, Luda Sobchuk, Leon Scott, and James Metters to join us shortly. City staff present today are Tori Parrish, Lawrence Courtney, and Linda Bennett. The order of the meeting will be as follows. We will have an introduction and overview of the project by city staff to the board and the public. There will then be a period for applicant presentation, which is a 10-minute time limit as determined by the chair, and any questions of the applicant by the board or staff. Any and all presenters should clearly state their name for the record. Persons affiliated with the project, be they owners, developers, designers, consultants, or other affiliated persons, should speak during this portion rather than during public comment. There will then be a period of public comment. Public comment is a 10-minute time limit or its equivalent as to the applicant presentation as determined by the chair. The applicant does not respond to comments made during public comment. Please, if you are a member of the public, please clearly state your name for the record. There will then follow a period of city staff comments and recommendations. This is in turn followed by applicant responses or clarifications to the public comment and city staff comments and recommendations. 5-minute rule applies to this portion as well. The applicant will then take a seat and will speak only if called upon by board or staff. This is followed finally by the board discussion and vote. The applicant presentation and the public comment are at this point closed. The applicant may clarify inaccurate information when recognized by the chair by raising their hand and waiting to be called upon. Otherwise, they may only speak if they are asked a question by a board member. There are no items this evening that have been withdrawn or deferred, which means we have 6 agenda items for this busy evening. This is a reminder to the public, if you are audible, please turn off all cell phones and other devices. Please also be advised that the BAR's purview and jurisdiction is limited. Please therefore limit your comments to architecture only. Comments related to zoning, such as parking, traffic, block coverage, and livability concerns are not the purview of this board and cannot be voiced here. We have some additional protocol to read into the record today. Thank you, Mr. Courtney. The following protocol will apply to this hearing. Staff will control the PowerPoint presentation that includes everything submitted by the applicant by the deadline in accordance with submittal requirements. Applicants simply need to ask staff to advance to the next slide during the presentation. Applicant, staff, and board members are required to give their name when they begin speaking. Video and microphone has been disabled for all attendees. Attendees, not board members or staff, will only be given the capability to speak when they are called on during the public comment period. The chat and Q&A functions have been disabled for everyone. Regarding public comment, the applicants, which means all team members and the public, have been required to register, indicate the project that they wish to comment on, and submit any documents in advance of the meeting. Just as in an in-person meeting, all applications heard today are part of the public meeting format. If you have registered to speak, you will be allowed to speak during the public comment portion of the meeting, and you will need to state your name and address for the record. Those members of the public that have registered will be called in order by project. Staff will call on the registered members of the public to speak for each project. If you're not a registered member, you will not be called upon. Additional protocol. Board members will be polled by the chairperson for comments and for their vote on a motion. Each member when voting should respond yea in favor or nay not in favor. The chair shall reread the motion verbatim, and the board member making the motion should correct the chair if he has not reread the motion accurately. If a board member needs to be recused, he or she will temporarily be removed from the meeting and placed back in the meeting at the start of the next agenda item. If the board needs to go into executive session, they will call in on a separate conference line, and all video and audio and on Zoom will be temporarily turned off until they are ready to return to the regular meeting. Results and staff comments will be posted on the city website, which is www.charleston-sc.gov/BAR. These proceedings are being recorded and broadcasted to the City of Charleston's YouTube channel. And Ms. Parrish, do we have agenda item number 1?
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Agenda item number 1 is 20 Rom Street. This is a request for approval to alter the design of the connections between the Romney Street residential and commercial entrances and the public sidewalk. The building's not rated, was constructed in 2019 or began construction. It's in the historic corridor district. Before you have a context slide showing lot parcels and streets. This is Highway 52, which is Morrison Drive on the left, on the west side. Huguenin Avenue bisects the property there. And then this is Romney at the south. And here we go with some aerial views of the same location. We are ready for the applicant to present.
Thank you. Who do we have for the applicant this afternoon?
Craig Clemens with Sotil and Sotil.
Welcome, Mr. Clemens.
Thank you. Let's see. Do you all have my the presentation that I sent?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Mr. Courtney has it, and you just tell him what slide you want to advance to, and we'll take it from there.
It's a good place to start right here. So this is a project that's been before the board a number of times. And just a few it's getting to the end and we're just kind of clean up a few details. But I thought it necessary to give you a bit of history as to why the building was placed as it was. And we were designing this project in 2015. Our charrette that we held was in November of 2015. So that's how long we've been at this. This is an image of Romney Street at the time. As most of you, if not all of you know, Laurel Island has been sort of on and off for different development proposals over time. Laurel Island is to the right of this image. So this would be a road that would access Laurel Island. Right now it's a small 2-lane road. And this was the proposed cross-section or a conceptual alignment that was presented to us at the beginning of the project. And you can see that it shows the realigned Romney Street encroaching into what was then our site is now Foundry Point by 24 feet. So with that premise in mind, we of course want the building to have a proper urban placement and be up against the back of the sidewalk, but we pushed the building back by that amount in design, anticipating that this street section would be widened and that our building would be properly oriented to the street. We were also hoping that over time, at some point, the city of Charleston would take this over from the DOT and do more of a proper urban street section. This is obviously very sort of highway street design, but that was out of our control at the time, but we did want the building in the proper relationship with the street. So the street was also supposed to be elevated, like the roadway was supposed to be elevated. And so this informed both the placement relative to the street in terms of horizontal distance, and also the setting of the finished floor elevations of the project. Next slide. So this was our conceptual, this is an excerpt from our conceptuals. And you can see kind of just below the lower right-hand corner of the building, where the existing property line was, it kind of pokes out into the street right at the corner there and sort of comes back at an angle. That's where our property line was at the time. You can see we envisioned a street section where the sidewalk was against the building, and then we had a tree lawn and on-street parking. That was sort of our wish list for that street section at the time of conceptual design. Next slide. So this was the landscape architect's site plan from the final BAR submittal. And going through the TRC process, we sort of had to reconcile where the curb was at the time. And so what we ended up with was a rather odd situation where we have the sidewalk up against our building and the curb is way down below us. We're further off the street than we'd like to be. But we're sort of, again, hoping that long-term this street section would be improved. Should also point out that this drawing at this point does not really deal with the elevation change, the fact that the road is lower than the building. And also subsequent to this, the DOT required a kind of their standard, 4-foot concrete ribbon sidewalk down at the curb. Is not shown here, but we are being required to pour that. So we're going to have 2 sidewalks, which is just, the plot thickens, but that was subsequent to this drawing. But you can see we have a kind of an odd street frontage situation. So next slide. This was an interim design that our firm was not a part of. I guess this was, from what I understand, the landscape architect and a civil consultant to connect what was supposed to be the sidewalk against the street, which is up at the building, and the small DOT sidewalk down at closer to the curb. And what this proposed was a big stair in the middle in front of our stair, and 2 long ramps asymmetrically situated on either side of that, flanking down and connecting to the street. We do have an ADA entrance on this frontage, and so we did need ADA access, and those ramps were the proposed solution. I was not in favor of this design for a couple of reasons. One of them is the big stair in the front. There's actually a drainage inlet right in the path of it that's existing. And secondly, it really occupies our better part of our street frontage with these ramps that are parallel with the street. It creates this sort of a barrier. I can't imagine this would be a very sightly situation when it was executed. And so what we proposed, next slide, was, and again, we still hope this to be an interim situation, that our sidewalk will ultimately be the sidewalk. But in the meantime, what we propose as an alternative to what the slide you just saw was to create a landscape bed in front of the entrance, and 2 flanking ramps that could come up and circle up and hit the walkway along the building, and a landscape bed that could absorb that drainage inlet so it's not terribly visible. And then adding 4 stairs along the sidewalk to connect the DOT sidewalk up to the commercial storefronts at the building. So we have more of a continuously connected situation along the entire frontage. We don't plow through our drainage inlet. And again, not how I don't think I would have designed this from a blank canvas, but dealing with the rather odd situation in hopes that ultimately, development pressure in Laurel Island is still very real. And I do believe that street section will be reevaluated at some point in the fairly near future. But this was our proposed solution in the interim. Oh, I should say also proposing street trees and a tree lawn down at the new sidewalk.
Okay.
Down at the new curb.
Mr. Clements, does that conclude your remarks?
Yes, it does.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Mhm.
We'll now have the opportunity for public comment. Ms. Parrish, do we have any public comment on this project?
We do not.
Okay, we'll move ahead to city staff comments and recommendations.
Sure thing. Staff observations. Number 1, these revisions are necessitated by changes to previous city plans for the widening and elevation of Romney Street after TRC review, ADA requirements, and what appears to be a lack of coordination of site work during construction. 2, working with the applicant on site work has been challenging throughout the project, and there has already been unapproved work performed. And 3, if the significant Laurel Island PUD occurs, it is likely that Romney Street would need to be improved and possibly widened. And staff comments. While staff would have preferred to see a simple continuation of the steps from the Building 1 entry and the upper walk down to the sidewalk, as shown in the most recent TRC sketch, which is similar to that which was presented to the board at final review, the above factors have forced an alternative response. 2, the current proposal does a good job of dealing with existing and possible future issues. 3, staff communicated with the applicant on several occasions the need to connect the upper walk to the North Romney Street sidewalk, which was indicated in the preliminary and final BAR review designs, and this has been ignored. This has resulted in an abrupt ending of the walk on the eastern point. 4, the oversized and conspicuous area drain should be painted and well screened with landscaping. And then the staff recommendation is As this area of the city is apparently in a somewhat unsettled state, staff reluctantly recommends approval of the revised entry area plan.
Okay, thank you very much, Mrs. Parrish. Let's see. Mr. Clements, you have any response to city comments or recommendations?
I would like just a clarification on item 3.
Yes, sir.
And just, I thought, I guess that's what I thought we were trying to accomplish with this proposal, is the connection of those upper and lower walkways. I just want to make sure I understand.
Right. We're talking about something that had been part of the preliminary and final review at the eastern point. Lawrence, if you want to go back up to the slide, we can point it out. On the eastern side, you could, yeah, right there.
Ah, I see.
So in some of the prior reviews, that connection was made to the sidewalk, and that's not been done on site.
Okay. And I don't see any reason why that could not be included in this improvement with us. I'm not sure what the grading situation is there, but I believe that can be accomplished with steps.
Well, we don't, I mean, that would be ideal. And I think that all of that concrete has already been poured. So, but that would be an ideal situation. I don't know.
Well, if, yeah, the concrete on the walkway has been poured, but I don't think this, I could be wrong. I'm in Savannah, but I don't think the sidewalk has been poured.
Okay, well, maybe it is a discussion point for the board then.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Clements and Ms. Parrish. Thank you for the clarification.
Sure thing.
At this time, we will have board discussion and potentially a vote. What do my fellow board members have to say about the Romney Street project?
Well, I'll kick it off, Ed, by first observing that I'm not exactly sure that Mr. Clements was involved in how we got here, but it seems like this is not the first time that he's been involved in the proposed solution to the best. So I think what's proposed is more than adequate. I think it's completely fine. And with the connection of the eastern walk, like y'all were just discussing, but it will always look a little weird so long as there are two sidewalks there, but hopefully that will rectify itself in the coming years. So I agree with staff's recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. White. Any other board members care to comment on 20 Romney?
Mr. Chairman, this is James. I
Yes, sir.
agree with Jay's comments and staff's comments.
Okay.
This is Leon.
Yep. Yes, sir.
Leon Scott. I am as well. I'm in agreement with staff and board comments so far.
All right. Anything from Luda?
Yes, I have a question. Can we go back to that solution sketch
Sure.
quickly? Yeah. How the transition will be handled between the street sidewalk and that slope up to the building sidewalk with the steps and all that? Is there a retaining wall, or it's a berm, or what is it? Do you have a elevation of the building with that part of the landscape and hardscape?
Yeah.
By any chance?
Yep. Yes. Hold on just a second, and we'll let Mr. Clements respond if he has an answer on meeting.
Sure. Right now, that lawn between the upper sidewalk and the lower sidewalk slopes down at a fairly good clip. So by the time you get up to the walkway, the drop along that edge is anywhere from 6 inches to a foot, but it's not a significant drop off. So no, there is not a retaining wall right now. That's just an edge to that sidewalk.
Okay. Very good.
What is the difference in grade from the bottom of the step to the upper step?
She's nice.
It varies. It varies along the frontage. I think at the worst case scenario, it's about 30 inches.
Right. That would be a one.
It's most pronounced at the eastern side, and it's the closest at the western side.
So something will be there vertically to hold that building sidewalk, right?
Yes, yes,
Anyway,
the slab turns down. So yeah, it's not just hanging out there.
30 inches, you're saying?
That's the difference in the upper and lower sidewalks at the sort of worst case portions of it.
Okay. All right. Other than that, I think it's, I agree with staff and board members. We need to approve this. But suggestion to staff, keep working on this one.
Right, and it sounds like Mr. Clements if he is able to, will want to assist with that. And I take from his remarks that he's willing to work with staff, particularly on the eastern portion of the property. I agree with fellow board comments and board member comments, as well as the staff comments and recommendations. That being said, is there a motion?
Sure, I'll introduce one. Approval with board and staff comments.
Mr. White, I understand your motion to be for approval with board and staff comments. Did I state that correctly?
That's correct.
I'll second that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. We have a second from Mr. Scott. I'll proceed to call the roll.
That was actually Mr. Meadows.
Mr. Meadows. I'll proceed to call the roll. Ms. Sobchuk, how do you vote?
Yay in favor?
Mr. Scott, how do you vote?
Yay in favor.
Mr. Meadows?
Yay in favor.
Mr. White?
Yay in favor.
Myself, yay in favor. Passes unanimously. Thank you for your time, Mr. Clements.
Thank you all.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
is the screen on full size?
I've noticed that as well. I do not believe it is, but I think Lawrence can adjust that if it's bothersome or trouble. Maybe it was.
Yep.
It would appear to be he sized it up as best he can.
Lawrence, if you hit Control L, it'll go full screen on you. Either that or it'll shut your computer off. I'm not sure.
We'll have to reconvene.
Well, that worked. And thank you very much, Mr. White.
Yeah, thank you, Lawrence.
That better, James?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, good. All right. What is agenda item number 2 this evening, Ms. Parrish?
I'm going to introduce agenda item number 2, but I know this is out of order, but if it's okay to get a point of clarification on agenda item number 1.
Certainly.
The way I understood, because it wasn't directive in the staff comment, but work with the applicant to make the connection at the eastern end. Was that part of the motion?
It was. That is correct. To the extent that construction has not been completed and Mr. Clements is able to ameliorate what you have pointed out to him, we would like him to work with staff to accomplish that.
Perfect. Thank you for that clarification.
Yep. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense.
Okay, great.
All right.
All right. Item 2, 107 Brigade Street.
107 Brigade Street. This is the request. Actually, this is an appeal of final staff inspection. It's the denial of fencing. Context says we were all over the place. The project is not rated construction 2019. This is also in the historic corridor district. And we'll look at a context slide, which is going to take us back to the same area so that I get to pronounce Huguenin Avenue again.
You got it.
Actually, I want to make just one correction on the context where Lawrence is showing the mouse. This property encompasses the area that's dashed in blue, as well as the area across Huguenin, where he was just showing. So this project is both those parcels. And again, we've got Morrison Drive over here on the east, Romney on the south, Brigade on the north. And here we have the aerial. So we're just adjacent to where we were a few minutes ago.
Mhm.
Okay, and we'll have the applicant present.
Okay, who do we have here this evening for the applicant?
This is J.R. Kramer, the Remark landscape architect for the project.
Good, Mr. Kramer, you have the floor.
All right, great. So I think this may be the last item for the project to get approved for the BAR. And so we've been working hard. Unfortunately, we could not find the original stamped BAR drawings. The project, the builder, the general contractor no longer had them. So what happened, this image right here indicates, it's highlighted, is the existing fencing has been built on site. It's a decorative steel fencing. And I know originally it was noted that the fencing should not have any fasteners. The fence that we specified, which was a steel fence, we did not think had fasteners. And but what was installed is a steel fence, but it does have fasteners. So if you could maybe go to the next slide. This is just a close up. Here, the next one. So these were the details for the fence that was originally approved. So you get the next slide. Here was a stamp for the mock-up panel, and so what appears, there was not a full section of fence installed, so you could not tell if it had fasteners or didn't have fasteners. So if you go to the next image, so this is what has been installed. The issue in question there is on the interior side of, like, say, the parking lot. The image on the left is what you see from public purview, which we do acknowledge the fasteners are there, but they're not visible from 5 feet away or 10 feet away. It's unfortunate incident that this did get installed. This was not the intent of the original design of the fence. We were made known afterwards, after everything was already installed. And so what we're asking for is to allow this fence to remain and just ask for forgiveness. And we're really sorry this happens. This was not the intent.
Okay. Is that conclude your remarks, Mr. Kramer, at least at this time?
I think so. I think the owner may be on. I'm not sure if you have anything
Sure.
for Oliver. But
yeah, this is Mike Oliver. Just to reiterate JR's comments, it was not our intent to install we noted the comments for the fasteners. We had installed the mock-up, and unfortunately it didn't have a center post in the mock-up where this might have come to light. And then once it was installed, it was noted that this, condition existed, and we, similar to the first project that was presented tonight, it's been a challenging project over the past 2.5, 3 years to get this to a point where it's completed, and we're excited it's done, and we're hoping. We're asking for an exemption here so that we can close out the BAR inspections for the property.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Oliver.
Yep.
Mrs. Parrish, do we have any staff public comment on this item?
No, sir, we do not.
I wouldn't think so. City staff comments and recommendations.
Sure. Staff observations. Number 1. In numerous documents, comments, notes, and various communications, staff has conveyed the theme of eliminating exposed fasteners and metalwork generally and in fencing specifically. 2, drawings of this fencing showing these exposed fasteners were never reviewed nor approved by the board or staff. Requests to applicant to produce documentation to the contrary have been unfulfilled. 3, fencing with these exposed fasteners was not shown on the mock-up drawings, nor were the connections displayed or approved on the mock-up. And 4, the subcontractor for the fencing has fabricated and installed fencing at other locations with this requirement, such as Buist Academy, and should be aware of, or at least have inquired of, the board's and staff's expectations for welded connections and the elimination of exposed fasteners. And staff comments. 1, the bolted connections are already failing, slipping down the posts in places, and are simply inferior connections. 2, the bolted connections, if made to be more secure, are not terribly unsightly, but staff is unconvinced that this may be successfully accomplished as currently installed. 3, staff notes a hole in the back of the connector at the post, which may have been designed to attach the connector to the post. While this would solve the problem of the connector slipping down, we would still have the exposed fasteners. 4, staff acknowledges that the powder-coated finish on the panels is superior to the traditionally painted finish that would have to occur at welded connections. 5, thoroughly clean and touch up the fencing components regardless of which direction the board chooses to take as a remedy. And 6, while the fencing is somewhat screened from view at this time, as the Laurel Island PUD evolves, the fencing will be very visible. And then staff recommendation is denial of appeal with staff comment number 5. Replace the bolted connections with welded, ground smooth, and painted connections to emulate the connections at the fence panels. Alternatively, if the board believes that the exposed fasteners are acceptable, staff will work with applicant to make the connections secure.
All right, thank you. Any response from Mr. Kramer or Mr. Oliver?
Yeah, this is J.R. Kramer. We did talk with the installer about, is it possible to have a welded connection? And he said it was not possible.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
This is Mike Oliver. So to speak to that as well, we would have to remove all of the fencing on the project and replace it with a fence that we can work through and get approved. And we're asking to not be able to do that. I do disagree that the fence is failing in locations. We can certainly review that and correct any of those items if this exemption is approved.
Okay, thank you, sir. We will now move on to board discussion and voting. A potential vote. What do my fellow board members have to say about agenda item number 2?
Mr. Chairman, I'll start on this one.
Yes, sir.
This is James.
Yes, sir.
If I read through the staff's observations and I read the staff's comments and listen to Tori talk about the efforts to get the correct fence installed, and it was simply not installed. It doesn't sound like it was a one-off kind of mistake. And it seems to me that if we don't support the denial of this, then I'm not sure why we're even here. And I know we're here to hear appeals, and that's one of the reasons that we're here. But if there had not been communication, not been numerous documents, comments, notes, and various communications conveyed the elimination of the exposed fasteners in the metalwork, generally and fencing specifically, maybe I'd feel differently, but it seems clear that while a mistake that Mr. Kramer and Mr. Oliver did not personally make, someone did, and I appreciate their acknowledging that. But I would support the staff's recommendations for a denial of the appeal.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Metters. Other board.
I agree with Mr. Metters.
Thank you, Mr. White.
This is Leon Scott. I also am in agreement with Mr. Meadows as well as staff recommendation.
Yes, this is Luda. I'm in agreement with everybody. And, if that post would not be omitted on the mock-up, it could be caught up early enough, but now it's unacceptable.
So, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank Luda for bringing that up. I had that on my notes and failed to do it. This is why the mock-ups are so important and why it's so important not to improve a mock-up that's not completed. Because if it had been completed and shown those, it wouldn't have been approved. So thank you, Luda, for bringing that up. It's very important.
Thank you both. Further board commentary.
I'll introduce a motion if everyone's ready.
That'll be fine, Mr. White.
Okay, I'll make a motion for denial of staff appeal with staff comment number 5 and with board comments.
Mr. White, I understand your motion to be for a denial of the appeal with staff comment number 5. Is that correct?
That's right, and board comments.
And board comments. Do I have a second?
I will second. This is Leon Scott.
I'm going to rule Mr. Scott as having gotten that second in before Mr. Metters.
Very good.
We have a motion by Mr. White, a second for denial of the appeal with staff comments number 5 and comments generally. Mrs. Sobchak, how do you vote on this motion?
Yay in favor.
Mr. Scott,
Yay in favor.
Mr. Metters,
Yay in favor.
Mr. White,
Yay in favor.
and myself would be yay in favor. And I do want to say to Mr. Oliver and Mr. Kramer that I'm sorry for this outcome, and I have no doubt that this was not your responsibility. But we have to be very careful about the exceptions we make with finishes. And I would just like to say it's a very unfortunate situation all around.
John, am I allowed to ask a quick question?
Yes, sir.
Are we, and I know we are, this was already voted on. Is it possible to only do it at the areas that are along the public right of way and not internal to the property?
I would have to defer to the staff to educate me on those parameters as they understand them. So I will defer that question to either Mr. Courtney or Mrs. Parrish, whoever, or both, whoever's best able to answer.
Well, Mr. Chairman, do we want to do that during this meeting, or
Well, that's a good point because they've already taken the vote. I think we can get back with that, and if it has to come back up in terms of the scope of this, it can be on a future agenda. Thank you.
I will plan to reach out to Lawrence and staff tomorrow.
Great, thank you, and to the extent that something can be done to accommodate Mr. Oliver, we'll work on that and speak with them in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Agenda item number 3, 838 Morrison Street.
This is the request for approval of the mock-up panel. This is in the Historic Corridor District. It's not rated. The context slide will show you the site. The site is bordered by East Bay Street, Morrison Drive, Johnson Street, and the ramp up to the Septima Clark Parkway Ravenel Bridge. And then this is taken from East Bay Street looking east. You can see the project site there. It looks very different now, but this was the existing site photo. You can see the bridge ramp in the distance. This actually is taken from the ramp up to the bridge looking southeast. And this is taken from the intersection of Johnson and Morrison, or East Bay. Sorry about that. And looking towards the site. And this one is looking the opposite direction from the same intersection. We'll have the applicant present.
Who do we have here tonight on behalf of the applicant?
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Chuck Travis. I'm a principal with the Housing Studio in Charlotte, North Carolina. Also have our project architect with us today, Rick Kamakaris. So both of us will have some brief comments to talk about something that we're very excited to be presenting, which is our mock-up panel and discussion of our exterior materials. So thank you for your time today and for the opportunity to go through this project with you. Like I said, our comments will be brief. It's hard to believe that 2018 in August is when we began this process with the design charrette. And we've been under construction, as most of you know, for about over a year now. And since it's been so long, perhaps Lawrence, you could go to the elevations. I'm just going to give you a very brief reminder of what the building is composed of from a design standpoint. The elevation you're looking at in the center is along Morrison Drive. And what it's composed of, as you may recall, is this a tall one-story retail along Morrison that's shielding 2 levels of parking behind it. And you see on the upper elevation is the view from the bridge ramp or from the river. The elevation above, you're looking at that tall 2-story on the ground level, which is parking that would be shielded. On the left-hand side of the center elevation, that's an 8-story high-rise sitting on top of the podium itself. And on the right-hand side, that is a 5-story mid-rise, comprising essentially 380 units total, of which we're going to have 5 to 10% affordable housing units instead of just paying into a fund. Our developer and owner of the building made the commitment that he wanted to have affordable housing be an integral part of this project. So we're very proud of that. And so as we progressed, actually we had the very good opportunity of meeting Tori. Tori, it's nice to have you on board, and Lawrence on site April 21st to go through a very early stage of our mock-up panel to talk primarily about brick and windows. At that point, we were able to talk about the brick selections that we've made that we feel very strongly about, some of the adjustments to some of those details that we've gone back and reconsidered and made some adjustments to that. So the panel that you saw yesterday on site is exactly what these drawings represent, and what's been built on site is what we're proposing to move forward with. I know that you had some discussions yesterday, as well as ourselves with Lawrence, about the closure brick sizes and some of the detailing on the upper level of the parapet of the Capitol, of the high rise. And I was going to let Rick Kamakaris discuss a little more about some of that conversation that day and the changes that we made.
Okay. Lawrence and Tori indicated that they weren't very happy with some of the way some of the joints were lining up at the cornice. So we made the adjustment to align the vertical joints at the closure and the roll at the roll lock and the soldier portions of that cornice, which we did and was installed on the mock-up.
Lawrence, can you go down to just slide down to the next slide. I think the members can see that better.
It's the detail on the upper right corner. So we adjusted the corner pieces to align the vertical joints.
Yeah, there you go, Lawrence. Thank you.
And then with regard to the actual using of the closure size brick at the top of the building, when we were selecting the materials, we wanted to use the larger brick size at the base of the building to help ground the building, and we think it worked out really well. While we were during our design phase, we were looking at some precedent imagery. We found it was pretty common for buildings that use this tripartite division to use the same material at the Capitol as at the base. We felt that worked out pretty well, because we feel that having those larger brick sizes at the top helps the pedestrians and occupants of the building down there at street level to really be able to perceive the texture, the relief, and the shadow lines of that brick detailing all the way up at the top of the building. So for that reason, we elected to use that size brick at the top.
So with that, Mr. Chairman, we'll turn it back over. Thank you.
Thank you both for your time. Let's see. Do we have any public comment on this agenda item, Ms. Parrish?
We do not.
Okay. We will proceed to city staff comments and recommendations.
All right. Staff observations. We'll begin with number 1. The closure brick was explicitly denied in staff comments at the board final review, which were made part of the approval motion. 2, after subsequent vigorous lobbying by the applicant to allow a representative sample of the closure brick on the mock-up for board comparison, staff acquiesced and agreed for applicant to show this representative sample in a limited fashion. It was understood by staff at the time that if allowed, the closure brick would be used only at the lower portion of the building to help establish a clear base for the structure. Applicant has used an excessive amount of the closure brick on the mock-up, showing it more extensively than as a simple representative portion, and is now showing it at what will be the higher parts of the building on top of modular brick, violating the basic board principle of material tectonics. And last, while staff agrees that the use of closure brick can be appropriate, alternatives to what is currently shown, its location and detailing need to be further studied. And then staff comments. The detailing with this brick has proven to be challenging, and the applicant has been working on the simplification of some details to better accommodate the brick. Due to the more contemporary nature of the building, staff is not opposed to the simplification of some of this detailing. It should also be noted that the more complicated detailing occurs on the lower portions of the building, becoming, I was reading it on paper, simplified as it goes up. Continue to work on the simplification and refinement to the detailing with the closure brick. 2, although it may be difficult to work out the coursing in some cases, wherever possible, eliminate mitered brick at outside corners. 3, while staff has no problem with the modular brick, we do not think that the form and finish of the closure brick is suited to this building. 4, staff has requested, although belatedly, that applicant provide alternatives to the proposed closure brick in the form of 3 or 4 small standalone sample panels, which, if the closure brick size were unavailable, could be presented with modular size brick for board and staff comparison. Applicant has refused to do this, preferring to focus the board's attention on their preferred closure brick. 5, while sealant colors are generally acceptable, continue to fine-tune these while moving forward. 6, eliminate the kicked out drip edge at the bottom edge of copings in lieu of a vertical hemmed edge spaced just far enough out from the face of brick to establish a drip nosing. This should be relatively tight with no building wrap being exposed as is currently shown. 7, due to its low elevation, flood panel anchorage isn't ideal, but recess the plates into the brick as shown and paint them the generalized brick mortar blended color. And 8, it is noted that applicant has proposed that lipped brick at loose lintels will be carried up through the second floor and then returned to a regular brick over lintel condition due to lessened visibility and the fact that these are almost always in shadow. Staff agrees with this approach as long as the lintels are painted the generalized brick mortar blended color of the wall above. The staff recommendation is deferral of the mock-up for restudy with board and staff comments.
Thank you,
Thank
Mrs.
you.
Bear. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I said thank you.
Let's see, move on to any applicant response or clarification as to city staff comments or recommendations. Mr. Travis or Mr. Karanakis?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. As you know, particularly if you're an architect on the board, how difficult it is now to be able to secure and procure building materials. What we are hoping for today is that there would be some level of approval by the board. As you know, windows are extremely hard to get in the process, have approved, and then get them manufactured and on site. So we would like, if possible, to have those approved. And then secondly, if we can approve the modular brick that we're using for the shaft of the building on the high rise, which is the majority of the brick that's on the remainder of the building. And if we can come to some understanding if the closures are agreeable to be used on the base of the building, we can certainly continue to work with you on the capital if needed. But obviously, we'd love to have approval of everything. But if we can approve certain pieces of the brick and the windows, that would definitely be helpful with some of our construction scheduling. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Travis. Board discussion and votes on 838 Morrison Drive. What do my fellow board members have to say about this mock-up?
Mr. Chairman, I'll start. This is James. So I want to apologize to you and the other board members for not being able to be in attendance for the site visit yesterday. However, the project manager on the site was gracious enough to be with me while I visited the site today. So in addition to the obvious things, you know, there's a gap from the top of the window to the lintel above, which I'm not sure how this will be left in its finished state. There's a gap in the mullion being the separation between the two windows to the surface metal that's below it, which I'm not sure how is going to be filled. The use of the fact that you can look up and see the holes of those bricks throughout the mock-up was, surprising to me. And we all certainly understand the challenges and difficulties with supply and demand. We all learned that a long time ago, which is why we have to be the best planners that we have ever been right now. I think about the previous application, and there is no application that's ever like any other application. Applications shouldn't be compared to each other. However, my memory is that one of the issues with the previous application was the fact that something wasn't shown in a mock-up, and if it had been, it may have created a situation that would have prevented a problem. And I try to learn from that, and I hope that we deny this, because I think it's an incomplete mock-up.
Thank you, Mr. Metters. Further board commentary.
I'll state that I agree with staff's assessment of the use of the closure brick. It's a scale that's foreign to Charleston. Not to say that an 8-story building is commonplace, but still, it's just the way it's rendered here, even in the photograph before us. It's a cartoonish proportion, and I fully agree with staff's assessment of this mock-up and their recommendation.
Further board comments.
I'm in agreement as well. This is Luda. With all the staff comments and recommendations, as well as notes James made additional to those comments.
This is Leon Scott. I'm also in agreement with staff comments as well, and as well as my my fellow board members thus far.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Scott. I would just add at the visit that I, for one, thought that the cornices, et cetera, were actually rendered quite well. I believe that the board, or the staff rather, has given some flexibility with materials, again, but given the contemporary nature of this material, but I think that their recommendations are sound. And so therefore I would join in the staff recommendation for deferral of the mock-up to address and tighten up these issues and make sure that the mock-up that we receive is final and complete. But for reasons we've discussed at other meetings, the issue of getting materials delivered is something that we deal with and we're seeing all the time. They're studying possible policy revision. Again, it's very hard to do something on a piecemeal basis, especially when a mock-up is effectively the guarantor of what the finished product is going to look like. So with that being said, do I have further board commentary or a motion?
I'll make a motion, Mr. Chairman, that we defer the mock-up with board and staff comments.
Thank you, Mr. Metters. Your motion, as I understand it, is for deferral of this mock-up for restudy with board and staff comments. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second that.
Mr. White seconds that motion. I'll now call the roll. Mrs. Sobchuk, how do you vote on this motion?
Yay in favor.
Mr. Scott?
Yay in favor.
Mr. Metters?
Yay in favor.
Mr. White?
Yay in favor.
And myself, yay in favor. Thank you very much. Now move on to agenda item number 4, Mrs. Parrish, 363 through 369 King.
All right, this is the request for preliminary approval for new construction of a student housing development behind existing historic structures to be rehabilitated. The historic buildings are category 3 and 4, constructed 1892 and pre-1884. These are in the old and historic district. For context, we've got the red outline there, but you can see Calhoun along the top of the page, King Street on the right side of the project there. And then this is looking north on King Street. The buildings are on the west side of the street. And then if you, the very obvious clay colored, red colored building on the left, and then the next 3 units. So you've got the red clay colored building, and then the next two buildings, including the little hyphen building in between. Those are all part of this. This is looking southwest. So the project incorporates the earthbound building here down to the red building. That's the little hyphen in the center. Another view looking northwest, a little closer. And then this image is taken from the intersection of Calhoun and King looking southwest. You can see the buildings down there on the left. These actual images are from 1973 survey cards in the order that they are on the street. You can take notice of alterations that may have happened over the years, as well as the historical fabric that lasted. The previous motion was conceptual approval with staff comments. That was back on January 13th. And then I can read the previous staff comments. I'm not sure if the applicants got those in there, but I'll run through them real fast. A, the building has been lowered to 5.5 stories per board motion with a flat roofed penthouse, and the overall building exterior is better articulated. Again, this is the structure behind the historic buildings. B, it is noted again that the cornice is shown as GFRP, which staff believes to be appropriate for this location, although samples need to be provided for the actual material proposed. C, the rear building is now very minimally visible from any public right-of-way. D, exterior lighting is to be subdued at the second floor terrace on King Street and at the rooftop penthouse level. The staff recommendation was conceptual approval of the new rear student housing block with the previous conceptual approval for work related to the historic structures with previous and current staff and board comments. There were no board comments during the January 13th meeting. And we'll have the applicant present.
Thank you. Who do we have here for the applicant? Mr. Ramos?
Yes, can you guys hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
I'm here with my colleague, Kira Brower. We turned on the camera in this meeting room and it was upside down. So we're going to go no camera tonight. So, but I did put on a tie. So I'm going to talk about the new buildings. I've been focusing on the new structure, and Kira's been the architect that's focusing on the historic buildings. Because this is a preliminary meeting, we're going to first highlight the changes that were made since our previous design, which are minimal, and then we're going to point out some of the details. There are a lot of details in the package, but in interest of time, we're only going to focus on just a few of them. If you could scroll down to the next page, please. Next, and one more. We did develop responses to each one of the comments from before. Again, in interest of time, I'm not going to go through those, but we will be talking about them as we look at the drawings. Next, please. In terms of design revisions from the previous meeting, they are minimal. In terms of the new building, we've tweaked the muntin or the mullion pattern for the storefront windows that are at the very top of the building at the 6th floor. You can see just some subtle differences. Also up at the 6th floor, we previously had an outdoor fireplace and chimney, as well as a covered porch. But unfortunately, we removed those items from the design. But what that does mean is that even less of the building is now visible because those were items that were visible from before. Other than that, there are just some subtle tweaking to fenestration and details. Next. And this is what that facade looks like if you were to peel away the buildings along King Street. Again, very, very similar to what was presented before. Next. This is the north facade. Again, very similar. We did tweak the amount of glass that was up at level 6. We had floor to ceiling glass on this north facade, but we found that we really needed to use a lot of that space for mechanical. And so we effectively eliminated a lot of the roof terrace that was up at that area and are using high windows instead of floor to ceiling glass. But in terms of what is visible from about Marion Square, it's really a very minimal change. And again, you can see that the chimney is now gone. Next. This is the north facade, very similar to before. This part of the building is really not visible unless you're on top of a building looking down. Next. And this is the west facade, the new design on the right, the old design on the left. You can see we've just done a little more composing of the facade. We've added some of that paneling detail, and but again, not really visible from the public right away. Next. We can zip through the floor plans as there are no notable changes. The only exception would be at level 6. If you go back one, if you look at the old level 6 on the left, we had a swimming pool. We also had an outdoor porch on the far left and the fireplace. Unfortunately, we due to some cost constraints, we had to eliminate the swimming pool. And we have a mechanical zone now on the north side, but we have a tall parapet at that section, and the mechanical equipment is not very tall. So we're confident that that mechanical equipment will not be visible from the street level. Next. This is the roof plan. There is some mechanical equipment that is on that high roof. I think for some reason that layer was not turned on in this drawing, but for later on in this drawing set, sheet A107, I believe, does show mechanical equipment. But again, it's pushed back, it's minimal in height, and we do not believe it will be visible. Next. These are the renderings. So about the middle of Marion Square, you'll start to see just a little bit of the building peeking out on top. Next. And then if you go all the way to the back of what would be the northeast corner of Marion Square, again, you'll see part of the top of the building. Really minimal because there's a lot of trees there. But in terms of changes from before, nothing of any significance. Next. And there's a little spot on Calhoun Street where the very top of the building will be visible. And so you can see the new rendering on top and the old rendering below. And the main difference being that there's no chimney anymore. Next slide. Next, Kira is going to talk about some of the research and revisions in regards to the historic King Street buildings.
Okay, so you can see here a rendering of the 3 historic buildings and the new hyphen on King Street. If you go to the next slide, you can see an existing photograph looking up King Street from 363. And on the next slide, we have a summary of the more in-depth architectural history of 363 King that we conducted with Brittany Lavelle-Tula with BVL Historic Preservation Research. If you go to the next slide, we have some more photographs that we were able to uncover. I'd like to note that it's still very difficult to determine the kind of materiality and form of the historic building, but there is a little more detail in these photographs than we had before and a little more research that was conducted. You can see from these photographs that there seems to be a base detail at the columns that is not currently there, that sandwiches some sort of material between the column and the granite piers. We believe is terracotta, which is the detail that is on the pilasters of the building on the north and south sides of the storefront. And I'll have a detail of that later in the set. You can also see the sill condition and kind of the portions of the columns. Go to the next slide. This is a view of the interior where you can see that double height retail space, which we are hoping to bring back. Go to the next slide. And again, some more photographs. These are from 1924 and 1965. It's still difficult to make out the storefront, but you can see the threshold that was relatively at grade in the left photo. Keep going. And here are some more recent photographs where a large signage van covered most of the building, and pre-renovation, the facade with all of the storefront and columns removed on the right in the 1980s. You can keep going. We have some historic precedents for the style, which is Richardsonian Romanesque. These include 208 King Street and 565 King. They both have rusticated stone at the base and kind of similar detailing in the brick above at 208 King. You can continue. As well as 309 Meeting Street incorporates arches and rusticated stone, and the granite piers at this building are very similar to the ones that are found on 363 King. You can keep going. And you can skip through these as this is the research from our previous submission, and we've discussed this information already. Here's a section through the existing building where you can see the historic and the 1901 construction in the back, which will be removed. You can keep going. We have some photographs of the other buildings as well, 367 and 369. To note here, you can see the existing terrazzo at 367 and the kind of angle that is cut into that, which we are hoping to pronounce in our new storefront here. You can keep going. And this is 369 and a hyphen and the existing terrazzo here as well. You can see in the image. Next slide. And next slide, that's there. And some existing photos. Historic photos from 1950 and 1973. You can keep going. And you want to go down, I think, one more. So here you can see a comparison between our original design and the current recommended improvements. The first thing I want to note is the proportion of the columns and the bases that we had in the conceptual BAR were kind of chunky and not exactly to proportion to the building correctly. And so we've since refined that and made them align to the datums of the existing piers on either side of the storefront where we have that granite base and that terracotta detail. So that's the first element that we have improved upon. We have also, in our research, come to the conclusion that the columns at the storefront would likely have been constructed of wood. This is based on historic, kind of the time period that this was created. We don't believe that cast iron decorative columns would have been introduced to this facade. And this is from our conversations with BVL Preservation Research. It's also related to the kind of the proportions of those columns, as they are rather slender and do not seem to be proportions that would be stone or masonry. We've also elected to remove the prism glass from the arched transoms, as this too is not indicative of the 1890s when this building was constructed. You can go to the next building. And this is a comparison between 367 and 369. At 367, we have removed the storefront and decided to mimic the geometry of the existing terrazzo. So that's what you're seeing on the right. We've added a signage band, and that's kind of everything that is going on in this in this building in terms of renovation. On 369, we've responded to the comments by raising the awning, and we will be painting that storefront and keeping the geometry the same as the original submission, which should match up with the terrazzo that is existing from the lesser store. The next slide. And here you can see some comparison renderings. And we have a couple more if you want to skip to the next. Have a nighttime rendering comparing the two. The current is on the top and the previous is below. And I believe there's one more rendering. And this is our proposed design for the building.
And so now we're going to just show just a few details and then we'll wrap up. If you could advance to sheet A203. Perfect. So on A203, we have just a few images of the materials that are going to be used on the new building. This building is going to be mostly clad in thin brick. So you see an image there. We're looking at a kind of a light beige brick. There are a lot of cornices and trim on the building that will be FRP. And there's an image of what that material looks like. And then there are a lot of recessed panels that are on the building, which will be fiber cement, almost like a board and batten detail. This building being in the center of a block, construction logistics has played a big part of material selection. We have a 10-foot wide opening at the back of the site where everything will be coming in and out of. And so we are making choices to pick the lightest materials and the smallest materials we can get, which is why we are using things like thin brick on this building. Next slide. We have a full set of details in this submission. We put just a few of them on this sheet just to show you some of the more common details. The top right is the parapet detail where you have a big cornice that projects out. One of the challenges with working with thin brick is that it's very thin. And so getting depth to the facade is a little challenging. We are achieving recesses and depth in windows by actually furring out the metal stud framing an extra 2.5 inches. So we go from a 6-inch stud and then we fur it out another 2.5 inches. That allows us to get some depth and layering to the facade. Fortunately, the thin bricks do come in L-shaped bricks so that at corners, it creates the appearance of a full depth brick. So you can see that in the parapet detail. There are 2 window details on this sheet. There's a window header detail, which shows that FRP header on the left. And then on the right is a jamb detail. Again, there are more details to the set. The windows that we are proposing to use is a product called Rayhow, which is a composite window. It's being used right now on the Poinsett project that's being constructed on the Crosstown. And so that's another product that's light and but very durable that we're proposing for this project. Next, we're going to show you just a few of the historic building details.
I think if you want to go to A341. It's a little far. So this A341 sheet has the details for the storefront at 363. And you can see the image on the lower right-hand corner, the terracotta detailing that's existing and the granite base. And so this is the basis for those column bases that will be across the facade underneath each of the arch points. So we hope to mimic that terracotta detail there. You can also better see the proportion of the columns and the detailing of the storefront and the kind of larger sill profile.
So at this point, we're going to just wrap it up. We were happy to answer any questions. One of the critiques we got last meeting was to do a deeper dive into the historic research, specifically with 363 King, and we've done that. Even with the additional research and with consulting a historic preservation expert, we still had to make a lot of guesses as to how this building was detailed. But I think we're getting a lot closer than where we were before. So with that, we're here to ask for preliminary BAR approval, and we thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Chairman, could I ask Steve a question?
Of course.
Yes.
Steve, I tried to look at the flashing details relative to adjacent to the thin brick, and there were lots that kind of went to the sites, but you got that detailed somewhere?
Yeah.
And my question is just from here. When you're using the thin brick, it can be more difficult to incorporate your flashing details. You don't think that that's going to accent your flashing for any reason, because you've got to do something differently because of the thin brick versus using the the full brick?
So if you like sheet 351 has a series of window details.
Right.
So why don't we zoom in to say the one right in the center? It's a sill detail, for example.
Yep.
And so you can see the thin brick below the window sill here is FRP. It's very likely that these windows are going to be a nailing flange window. So, the entire opening will have this flange. But in terms of the flashing, I don't think it's going to be any different. I don't think it's going to pose any challenges that we don't normally have in a brick building. In terms of flashing, I mean, we will have control joints on this building, just like we would with a typical brick building. But so here you can see a through wall flashing joint underneath that sill there. So just like a conventional brick facade, we want that flashing to daylight to get the water out.
Thank you.
Sure.
Let's see, not really out of sequence there. Wanted to see if we had any public comment on this. I believe we have Mr. Schwebler with us.
We do. Thank you, Stephen. And Mr. Schrebler is the only one for public comment on this one.
Okay, Mr. Schwebler, you have the floor when you're with us.
Thank you. This is Justin Schwebler with Historic Charleston Foundation. We would first like to thank the applicants for their continued communication regarding the development of this project. The applicants have already been given approval by HCF for the proposed facade restoration of 363 King Street based on the terms of our protective easement. The research and study of the historic storefronts along King Street and the applicant's attempt at recreating those finishes as accurately as possible should be commended. The new student housing building has not changed significantly from the conceptual phase that was approved. We're satisfied with the direction of the project and have no additional comments. We'd like to recommend preliminary approval for the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schwebler. City staff comments and recommendations.
Okay, staff observations. Though little changed from when the board last saw the project, it continues to be refined for the better. Applicant has incorporated and responded to board and staff comments. And while a few things need further discussion, almost all have been addressed appropriately. Applicant has provided additional research of the historic structures. Almost all items regarding the historic buildings have been addressed satisfactorily, and the design of the new building has changed a little. The color palette has been altered slightly for the better. And last, it appears that exterior materials have changed in some locations, potentially as a result of value engineering. While not all bad, applicants should clearly explain where this has occurred, As is usual, staff reserves the right to compare materials presented to the board at various reviews and to flag any materials that are thought to have been downgraded. And then staff comments. Number one, the introduction of wood columns at the facade of 363 King Street is out of character with the Richardsonian Romanesque style for a building such as this and with the other primary materials of the facade. Staff assumes that these columns would have been of a more substantial and durable nature, such as the stone seen at the cited 565 King Street. Staff believes that these would have been cast iron based on the referenced historical text description and based on the size of these members and photos. Additionally, in his book, The Buildings of Charleston, Jonathan posts and confirms that the columns were cast iron set on granite bases. There are no details of the columns above the base in this set. Restudy for additional historical evidence of wood columns or revise the material. Number two, although difficult to read and inconclusive in historic photographs, the tone of the columns appears to range from a dark to a neutral gray, as applicant is indicating in their current scheme. This tone should be maintained. Number three, the storefront of 367 King Street has been changed radically since last reviewed. Staff prefers the previous iteration, which appears to more closely match that shown in the 1901 photo on sheet BAR 04A. However, staff acknowledges that the storefront as proposed mimics a storefront arrangement that is part of the history of this building. Applicant shall make the case that this proposed arrangement is acceptable. 4, the hyphen on King Street continues to employ a simple, more contemporary language with large glazed openings. As previously noted and acknowledged here, fine-tune the lighting to be as subtle as is practical. 5, while approved at conceptual board review, the thin brick at the new building does require some special detailing. One consequence of using the thin brick is that it results in windows being recessed only 2 3/4 inches into the wall. These windows need to be more deeply recessed with much longer returns on the thin brick. Restudy the window detailing to provide a larger recess of the window into the wall. 6, a material change which should be noted includes the window surrounds, which were previously shown as brick and are now shown as GFRP. Staff finds this to be acceptable. Number 7, another material change is that of the metal wall panels previously shown on hyphens and spandrels, which have been changed to GFRC panels. Staff prefers a return to metal panels. Number 8, the windows are called out as composite windows. Submit the proposed windows along with the final brick selections to the board for review as part of the final review. 9, the sill projection shown on detail A3, page A367 seems too large. Decrease the depth of the projection. And 10, while GFRP is appropriate in these various applications, the actual material used will need to be thoroughly examined. And the staff recommendation is preliminary approval with board and staff comments.
Thank you very much. That
Thank you.
was quite a bit of ground to cover. All right. Would the applicant like to respond to any city staff comments or recommendations?
Yes, we will. We'll start with the historic comments.
For the main comment at 363 King Street, that's well taken that there's a lot of different options that we don't have conclusive evidence for the material of these columns. We're not opposed to having a cast iron column at this location. So we can definitely study that further to try and make this the most accurate representation of the past as we can. For comment number 2, we agree with having a darker color for these columns. It is difficult to tell, but this does seem to be the case. And for the third comment for 367 King, we do believe that having the storefront mimic the arrangement of the existing terrazzo is appropriate. We are not trying to recreate the storefront that was there in the past, but we do want to recognize kind of like a nod to the terrazzo that is there and incorporate it into the design as opposed to writing over it.
Okay. Go ahead.
So in terms of comment number 5 regarding the the thin brick. You hit the nail on the head. It makes detailing and depth much more challenging than a conventional brick. We went through about 6 iterations of the details to get depth in them. And so could we even beef up the studs even more, or maybe even recess the windows back into the jamb further? I'm sure we could, but in this particular case with a building that's marginally visible, and when it is visible, it's at great distances. I just ask that we not have to do that for this specific project, because I don't believe it would ever be appreciated even if we did have, say, 6-inch jambs. We absolutely would continue to fine tune the FRP and bring samples, especially when we can meet in person. But that's it. Thank you.
Thank you both. All right. We'll now open the floor for board discussion and a potential vote. What do my fellow board members have to say about this agenda item?
Well, I'll kick this one off. And I remember the discussion about the columns at 363 back at the conceptual stage. And there's a newspaper article, I think, that's quoted as saying that the columns are finely wrought. And I think that's where Poston got his notion that this was a cast iron column, like a wrought iron column. But in the language of the day, that just means that it was finely crafted, not necessarily that they were made of iron. And so if there's no physical evidence that they were iron, and they're presently wood, and they're in the same basic configuration as the earlier depictions, then the balance of evidence suggests that they were probably always wood. So I'm fine with it, and the fact that HCF, who holds an easement on the property, seems to concur with that approach makes me comfortable with it as well. The storefront change on 367, I think, is fine. You work with what's there, and I mean, we're not necessarily restoring that facade to its original appearance. So I think that's fine. And the balance of staff comments I agree with. The only thing is that the Rahal windows are a PVC product, if I'm familiar, if I remember correctly. And if they're a tabbed window, then you're only going to get so much depth out of them anyway, because they have to meet the wall assembly in a very particular fashion. But I kind of agree with the applicant in what they're saying about the limited visibility of that condition. And really, I think the detail is pretty successful given the extreme limitations on the palette.
Thank you, Mr. White. Further board comments?
This is Luda. About the depth of the recess for the window, actually, if you will have a full brick, you will have probably 2 3/8 of the recess if it's a brick veneer. So 2 3/4 seems works well, all things considered. And yes, the vinyl with the application, how it will be installed, will be difficult to move furthermore. I am in agreement about the wood column on a historic building, and as well as the storefront, new storefront, kind of framing the rather than what we saw the storefront previously. So I would be, with all other staff comments, I will be comfortable to recommend for a preliminary approval of this project.
Further board comments?
Sure, Mr. Chairman, this is James. I prefer the previous 367 east elevation. That's the first comment. The second is that I agree with Steve about the proximity of the building in terms of the recessed window. And I actually thought about it a little bit differently, that, the further it's recessed, it does increase your likely success for having a lower maintenance, the further those windows can be, inset. But using these thin brick is, it just naturally creates that challenge. It is what it is. So if we're approving the thin brick, we're approving the sequences that follow that.
Okay, thank you. Further board comment?
This is Leon. I'm comfortable with staff recommendations.
Okay.
I can introduce a motion if everyone's
That would
ready.
be fine. Be glad to entertain a motion. Right.
Okay, I'll make a motion for preliminary approval with board comments and staff comments 2 and then 6 through 10.
Mr. White, your motion, as I understand it, is for preliminary approval with board comments and staff comments 2 and 6 through 10 inclusive, with final review by the board.
Final review by, yes, that's correct.
Is that correct? And we'll have the second from Luda, Ms. Sobchak. All right, I'll proceed to call the roll. Mr. Scott, how do you vote on this agenda item?
Yay in favor.
Mr. Metters?
Yay in favor.
Mr. White?
Yay in favor.
Ms. Sobchak?
Yay in favor.
And myself, yay in favor. It's unanimous 5-0. Thank you very much.
I just asked, did you say it was final approval by board, or will we be coming back to the board or going to staff?
Well, we just love hearing you talk so much. Come back to the board.
All right.
No, it was final review by the board.
Yep, final review by the board.
We'll get the camera fixed next time.
That's okay. We trust you if you say you got your tie on. I've been there too. All right.
Okay. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. Agenda item number 5 is 609 King Street. The request is for final approval for complete demolition of the structure. Category 0 not rated. This is in the Cannonboro, Elliottboro neighborhood. Construction is believed to be between 1925 and 1935, and this is in the Old and Historic District. The contact serial shown here, the red box indicates the structure that's in question here. The building is on the west side of King Street. You can see King running through the middle of the slide there. The project site is right at the terminus of Columbus Street. This is an elevation of the building. This photo is sort of taken from the terminus of Columbus Street, and that's King right in front of you. Also taken from Columbus. And looking down King Street from the project location. And this is looking across the street from the project location. That's Columbus right there across from you. Looking north. This is a survey card from 1985 at the time. That's what I thought. At the time, there was a pawn shop is one of the businesses that occupied the space. And we will have the applicant present. We have Richard Gow presenting this one.
I am not seeing Mr. Gow in the attendees list. Perhaps someone could tell me if there is another name we should allow in.
That is funny. I thought I saw him earlier. Let's see who's on the, who else is on that team?
Perhaps
Ted Risch.
Ted Risch.
Ted,
Yeah.
there you go.
Poor Ted. He's going to have to do it.
Thank you. And we apologize for not putting in both of our names. I'm Richard Gow with LS3P. I'm here with Ted. And joining us in the audience are our clients from Liberty Senior Living, Scott Parker from Design Works, and the folks at Ramza. 2 years ago, when the primarily cinder block and metal buildings on this 6-acre site associated with the Currier Square Phase 2 project, which extends from St. Philip to Line and to Spring. At the time, there were a number of buildings on the property which were substandard. And at the time, Mr. Dowd, the city architect, advised us to wait on this building because of its location and some of the styling on it would lead it to be more controversial. At that time, he said he would like to see what was being proposed on the project site before he would weigh in. And we had conversations with the preservation organizations at the same time, and they kind of said the same thing. So because we have done design work on a building, we're bringing this to you at this time. And in an effort to be comprehensive, we feel like a comprehensive review of the ordinance, the historical features, the architectural features, the aesthetic features, the nature and character of the surrounding area, the historic and cultural importance, and the importance of the city are all very important. This isn't a test like a variance where everything has to be met, but these are the criteria that the board should be using. Next, please. So this is the aerial site, which Ms. Parrish already covered, so we can go to the next one. And these are details on the front facade. You can see the condition of the building, the delamination at the unreinforced masonry pier on the left, or the horizontal cracks that occur at the pier where it intersects the panels at every one of the piers. And you can see where the photos are located. The building maybe was symmetrical at one time, but currently the openings, as you can see in the little plan, have a variation. And from the visit yesterday, you probably saw that the tiles on the two left and the center bay are similar, and the tile on the right is a terrazzo. And we think that underwent, most of the modification. But you can see the condition and the materials and how they intersect, and how what the condition is. Next. And these are some additional details. You can see at the retail entrance in the upper left is the leftmost bay. That's where there was a restaurant culturally in the past. You can see the steel beam up above in the plywood soffit, the center bay, and you can see on the right-hand side on the upper, the retail entrance. The skirt board under the windows are currently vinyl, shiplapped vinyl, and the windows have been all boarded up because they were literally displacing by inches, several years ago, and we thought it was in the best interest of the building to preserve its condition and not let it just fall down. And you can see what the building is made out of in the photo on the bottom right. Next. This is a photograph of the north wall. Next. And this is a photograph of the south wall, which fronts a small alley on the property called Rogers Alley. You can see the form is typical of a one-story building with a sloping roof towards the rear, with the stepping parapet as it moves to the back. On this facade, there are 5 openings, which are hard to see, which were square and horizontal in nature that have been closed up. It's a parge coat painted wall. Next. The front facade, which arguably is the part that most people gravitate towards on this building. The materials, as we saw yesterday, and on the three sides and the back are unremarkable, but the facade has some character. And what people have talked about is the in and out of the facade, and the glazing percentage are good. We feel like the building is short for King Street standards, even old King Street standards. And at 9 feet, the soffit height is really very low for a current day or even a good retail building that one might like to see serving neighborhood retail. You can see the Art Deco styling that people have referred to in some of the commentary that you'll hear. It's primarily in the piers as they're built up and then stuccoed, and then the panels above the three bays are really just stucco projections in this kind of stepped fashion. The panel that's just below the stucco is different in each case. That's probably where a lot of the signage occurred, and that transition from vertical to horizontal is suspect at best, and where a lot of the cracking probably emanates from is right along that line. Next. This is the western side. It has undergone most of the morphology on this building as it's gone from retail to industrial, back to retail, and it has a slightly different block texture on this wall from the side walls. You can see the parapet at the structural wall on the left, and then there's a demising wall and a structural wall that projects above that projecting bay on the back. Next. And here are some interior images. You know, we've looked at many old buildings together over the years, and we try to find interesting, different types of detailing that would indicate an importance or curiosity or character. And it's really hard to find anything here but unreinforced block, simple trusses, wood ceiling framing. The front facade has most of the detailing, if you will, because they needed to create projections out of brick, and you can see that there on the bottom right. Next, please. And obviously, there are a lot of things to consider when undertaking an important task such as the demolition of an old building. And you could read all of that, and I'm assuming you have already read it, but I think it would be important to just look at the conclusion, which is in the structural report, which you may have a copy of. But on page 11, it says that the extent of repairs and structural strengthening necessary for this building will require extensive modification, partial demolition, and reinforcement of nearly all structural elements. And I would add all non-structural elements as well. Components and cladding is required to be is required to meet the code as well, even if it's not structural. There is substantial risk that the repair work required could result in further damage to the existing building in order to complete the repairs. In addition, there is likely not a reasonable method to address liquefaction or foundation issues. It's probably spread footings, and like a lot of buildings in Charleston, they're subject to liquefaction. As the building stands, it poses a very high probability of failure should it experience a design seismic event. In effect, to reuse this building as it is would require us to actually build onto every surface, either a reinforcing steel component, shotcrete, bolts, gusset plates on trusses. All of the things that we have discussed in the past on other buildings would have to occur here as well. In addition, the glazing, the framing, all of the front facade components would need to be restrained and laterally, and the elegance of any glass or shape would be somewhat compromised by the heaviness of what we would have to come back with to restrain it. Next. The front facade has Art Deco features, but they are notably understated when compared to other buildings in Charleston. The Art Deco examples of Charleston and King are many. Because we went to the building yesterday and somebody remarked that this is one of only 4 buildings on King Street, we Googled Art Deco buildings in Charleston, and just to kind of see if that person was correct. And what we got was 4 beautiful images of the buildings that you know. And however, if you drive up and down and walk and are patient and don't rely on Google, you'll see that there are 14 or 15 buildings on King Street alone that have Art Deco influence. And all of them are 2-story or taller. And that's just between Market and Spring. This building is not the best example by far. And I would add that the prominence of King Street in its importance to the city manifests itself in many grand facades and less grand and even simple, but even in those cases, the windows are small, are much taller, the materials are better, and in many times the detailing is exquisite. This part of King Street should be the same, and it will be hard to do if we have to save this building in the middle of the site. The photographs on the right are of buildings of some admiration that we would like to think are better examples of buildings worth saving if such a thing could happen. And I point you to the building, the photograph on the upper right, which shows Broad Street and the terminus of the Exchange Building. And we'll get to that in a minute. Next, please. So you see this photograph of historic King Street and the grandeur of King Street over the years. It's arguably one of the best shopping streets in America, in large part to the quality of the facades and the connectivity that the buildings have to one another. And they, largely are 3- and 4-story and taller buildings. And if you consider the map on the bottom tries to indicate that the criteria of nature and character of the surrounding area is really quite important. A building here may not be as important as a building here because of its juxtaposition with a terminus of a street that dead ends into it. And we all know of the great examples in the city, and these are a few that occur on King. If you consider the site at the intersection of Columbus and King, this is a principal location in the Upper Peninsula, and it's an opportunity for greatness. Looking at this map of Charleston, you can see how few opportunities there are where we can put a promising building capable of defining a district. This area of Charleston has largely changed since the 50s, when the printing plant was built across the street, and U-Haul, all of our favorite buildings, were built in the 50s. And it's hoped that what will happen in this district will be a transformation into a mid-rise mixed-use district whose charge is to increase density and put more people in closer proximity to where they can live, work, and shop. And you can see from the projects that have happened in the last few years and what is to come, that this building on this site is really going to be arguably the center of this new district. And I would ask you to just consider, can you imagine if we had saved the one-story bank building where Saks Fifth Avenue is? And because it was old and possibly had nice detailing on it, what would we have at that intersection? And if you can imagine if we saved the one-story gas station at Market and King where Charleston Place is. We have to be bold in our plans and in our aspirations for the city. And if those things were allowed to happen and remain, where would we be today? And I ask you the same thing about this intersection. Columbus is a principal east-west street with Hampstead Square at one end in the middle of the east side, with the cigar building and a beautiful vista of the Ravenel Bridge. And we feel what this west end deserves is something much more befitting of a principal east-west street, like the Exchange Building does to Broad Street. It gives you a place that's memorable, and it defines a district simply because of its presence and its prominence and its quality. How will we feel in 10 years after U-Haul and the printing plant are replaced with fantastic buildings, and we have this 10,000 square foot mediocre building as a centerpiece of a 3-acre site across the street? Nobody we have talked to in years about this site wants this to happen. Let's go to the next page, please. Here are the Sanborn maps. On the upper left is the 1888, when the building was similarly sized but made of wood. It was 2-story at the time. It had the same tripartite organization with the center of wall down the middle of the center bay. And then the 1902 Sanborn map. And then we see that the building changes materials in the 1944 Sanborn. We, in our historic report, pegged the building in the late 20s due to some research that our historical consultant did with the city directories and the business name changing that went on. We understand that there may be different situations. We did a research pass since we've submitted this application, where we find that the principal uses in the building after 36 were restaurants, loan companies, men's clothes, laundry, barber shop, and a market grocer and drugstore and electrical repair. Basically, neighborhood retail. And, you know, it served its purpose for many years, a long, useful life. And it's sitting in the middle of this large parking lot today, waiting for us to think about the next life of this district. The building, as you can see on the right, is not rated, and it's not in the book that Mr. Poston wrote in the late 90s, and it's a small neighborhood retail building that we feel like has served a long, useful life. And when the building adjacent to Hoffler Place building was built, there was an understanding that the property owner had with the developer that they would put something of memory to help us in this era understand who was there. And so there's a sign that's been put up that's going to be dedicated. And so there is a way to remember a building, and there's a very easy way to remember a building, and we can all talk as we move on about how we might do that. But in our opinion, this should not be the definer of this new district. The quality, the aesthetics, and all the other components that we've discussed do not merit that. That's the presentation. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Gow, for that. We will have questions in just a moment, but we are going to proceed with public comment portion of this. We have a ground to cover. Tori, I'm looking at your Excel spreadsheet starting at line 13.
Aaron Minigan, is that what you've got first?
Correct. Do you have, is Miss Minigan going to speak, or did she, oh, I see speak.
If she's on, let me grab
Okay,
her.
great. And this is a friendly reminder that we have a number of comments on this, and that normally public comment is limited to 10 minutes. We have a little leeway on that just because of the number of people who are weighing in, but please do your best to keep your comments on point and pithy if you are a public comment.
Aaron's in the meeting.
Hi, Tori, I'm here.
Thank you.
Yeah. Erin Minigan with the Preservation Society of Charleston. The Preservation Society appreciates the applicant providing background on the demolition request, as well as the opportunity to visit the site to more closely inspect the building yesterday. We are concerned by this demolition request and feel more information is warranted for the board's consideration. First, the historic report provided with the application lacks details on the building's cultural history and contains inaccurate information. As evidenced by articles in the News and Courier, the building was constructed in 1937 in the Art Deco style characteristic of the time. This area of Charleston was an important center for African American and immigrant communities in the 19th and early 20th centuries. According to recent research conducted in the city directories and Sanborn maps, this block alone once housed nearly 30 storefronts primarily occupied by Jewish, Greek, and Black merchants. In fact, the State Historic Preservation Office recently gave a determination this upper area of King Street is eligible for listing as a National Register Historic District, given its history as a thriving commercial corridor of Jewish and immigrant enterprise from the late 19th to mid 20th century. And this building would likely be a contributing resource to that district pending further investigation. As a result, we feel more research and documentation must be done on the specific historic uses and tenants to better understand the building's cultural significance. Furthermore, this building is one of the few remaining examples of Art Deco architecture in Charleston, and notably the last remaining historic building fronting King Street from Spring Street to Line Street, which we feel are important factors to weigh in considering its preservation. Second, we are concerned the applicant has not studied incorporating the existing building into the redevelopment of the site. There are several recent examples of large new construction projects that have successfully retained historic buildings as part of their program, including at 511 Meeting Street, 577 Meeting Street, and 578 Meeting Street. Given the unique architecture and history of the building, we strongly feel that the preservation and incorporation of this building needs to be explored. Finally, we do not feel the argument of structural deficiencies rises to the level of warranting consideration of demolition. We urge the board to defer this application to allow the applicant to provide additional information on the building's cultural history and potential for being incorporated into the redevelopment of the site. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Minigan. I believe we have Mr. Gould.
That's correct.
Okay.
I believe he is muted.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Hi, Andrew.
Hello. Yes, Andrew Gould here. I'm speaking on behalf of the Cannonbow Elliott Bow Neighborhood Association. We first started reviewing this project, the idea to develop this block, about 6 years ago, That was when the first renderings of the Courier Square project were released. And I remember at least 6 years ago meeting in the mayor's office with Scott Parker to review this project. And at that time, it was quite clear that the intention was to demolish this building and to build a new structure that would cover the entire block, including the relocation of Rogers Alley, so that the new building could really center on this terminal intersection here. And for the past 6 years, this project has come back to the neighborhood association again and again. We've repeatedly seen, updated renderings, updated concept development as different developer clients have come and gone. And for this entire 6 years of reviewing this, no one has ever expressed any concern that this building would be demolished. It would everybody that I ever met with, any neighborhood meetings I was ever present at, whenever this this idea was expressed, everyone always reacted, well, of course that building would go. I mean, there's nothing there that is worth saving in comparison to the splendid opportunity of building a grand new building to turn this block of King Street into something that could be the equal of the other blocks of King Street. Because that's what really the neighborhood's priority is, that we don't want surface parking lots and little sort of derelict strip mall buildings like this. We want our stretch of King Street to be like other stretches of King Street, large, beautiful buildings. So I think that's important to understand. This demolition proposal is not something we learned about last month. It's not something that we need some time to do historic research on and deliberate about. We as a neighborhood have been hearing about this for 6 years, and no one has ever come forward and said that they have some historical or emotional attachment to this building. No one's ever come forward and said, my grandfather used to run his business out of that. We get that a lot with other buildings, but it's never happened with this building. Nobody's ever expressed the slightest bit of interest in it. So, in terms of the sort of the history and the politics from our perspective, the case is closed. Nobody particularly cares about this building. We'd rather clear the path for the highest quality development that we could see here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gould.
Mr. Chair, before you jump to any emails or letters, there are 2 more speakers, if you don't mind me introducing them.
Certainly.
We've got Justin Schwebler from Historic Charleston Foundation. We'll have him next. And then right after that, Marion Hawkins.
Thank you.
Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, Mr. Schwebler.
This is Justin Schwebler with Historic Charleston Foundation. I'll be reiterating some points that we've heard from Aaron, but I'll proceed. I would like first to thank the applicants for meeting with us to discuss their justification for this submittal. While we understand their special interest in seeing this building demolished in order to meet their development goals for the senior living facility on agenda item 6 of tonight's meeting, we do not agree with their assessment of this building's structural integrity or cultural significance. With closer inspection at the site visit yesterday afternoon, we've come to the conclusion that the building is in a much better state than expected. All the load-bearing walls seem to be in relatively good condition, and much of the original envelope is intact, including some of the original display cases on the storefront that are now obscured by plywood. There is minor cracking and deterioration in the exterior parge coats, especially on the front facade, but nothing atypical for ongoing maintenance of any historic structure in Charleston. The front of this building is the most character-defining feature. It's one of the few remaining Art Deco facades in the city and the only remaining Deco facade on Upper King Street. In a letter submitted to HCF by Kevin Eberly, he was able to uncover that this building was designed by Charleston architect Stephen Thomas, who was one of the leading architects in the city in the 1930s. While this building is not a high-style example of the movement like the Crest Building or Riviera, It is emblematic as a vernacular representation of Art Deco commercial buildings associated with the development of Upper King Street in the 20th century. Only a few steps to the south, a new state historic marker has been installed and will officially be unveiled on June 8th, as Richard mentioned. Thanks to the research of architectural historian Brittany Lavelle-Tula, this sign illuminates the history of Little Jerusalem neighborhood, in which this building is the last remaining structure on this block of King Street. Thanks to Brittany's research, the State Historic Preservation Office has also granted preliminary approval for Little Jerusalem National Register Historic District, and 609 would be a contributing structure to that district. Again, while we understand the desire for a developer to work with a blank slate and the difficulties of incorporating a single-story historic structure into a site plan of a 6-story zoning district, we do not find sufficient evidence to justify the demolition of this notable and rare example of vernacular Art Deco architecture. The applicants should restudy their plans and figure out a way to incorporate this historic structure into the programming of the development. Successful attempts to preserve historic structures with new developments have been done very recently, of which 511 Meeting Street is a great example, as noted previously. We recommend denial of this request for demolition of 609 King Street. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schwebler. Will one other additional speaker, Tori?
Marion Hawkins is ready.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and fellow board members. My name is Marion Hawkins. I'm president of the Cannonboro-Elliott Borough Neighborhood Association. Our design committee chairman, Andrew Gould, emphasized several key points. I just want to present that the applicant has engaged the neighborhood association throughout the process, especially for the concept of the new project and the request for demolition. Both were presented at our March 1st meeting, and though we do not take demolition requests lightly, we feel like with the significance of this building architecturally and culturally being very minimal, and after hearing the presentation, it was voted and approved by our neighborhood association to support the request for demolition. Again, we thank you for your for hearing our comments and submit our recommendation to the board.
Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. Any further live commentary, Ms. Parrish?
I do not see any other live speakers for this item.
Okay. Then I don't have all of the letters that you have. I believe you have, I see you here, you have letters from Kevin Eberly, C.A. Maloney, and Charles Smith. Is that still the case?
That is correct.
Okay. If you want to read those or the relevant parts of those into the record, then I will be glad to go through the comments.
I'll be happy to. I'm going to start with the letter from C.A. Maloney. To whom it may concern, I would like to voice my opposition to the demolition request for the historic Art Deco style commercial retail buildings at 609 to 613 King Street. As a longtime resident just a block away on St. Philip Street, I have watched as many of the Upper King Street buildings of varying architectural styles have been torn down and replaced with buildings that more often than do not replicate the look or feel of the area's previous history. This is just another example in a long line. Humble one-story commercial buildings, historically not uncommon on Upper King Street, are being replaced by megastructures. Okay, that's, well, outside of purview, I guess, but being replaced by megastructures. This building is now dwarfed by new construction. In my opinion, these large structures tend to have their long-term undesirable effects on the single-family homes. In other words, the loss of smaller commercial buildings in the area is taking a toll on the historic fabric and the livability for the few remaining residents that actually call this neighborhood home. I respectfully suggest incorporating these older buildings into a scaled-down development plan rather than a big box with generic details. I find it interesting that these buildings have been used for the last couple of decades by their current owner, but in the face of profitable redevelopment, they are not code compliant or worthy of upgrade and continued use. C.A. Maloney, 239 St. Philip Street.
Okay.
And then the next letter is from Kevin Eberly of 367 President Street. I would like to register my very strong opposition to demolishing the historic stores at 609, 611, and 613 King Street. The original building at the corner of Rogers Alley was built in 1876. That two-story frame triplex lasted several decades, but in 1936, the owners decided to replace it. The earlier building was thought to be a fire hazard. Notable architect Stephen Thomas designed the replacement. Although the footprint of the building did not change much and it was still a triplex, the design of the building obviously did. The new building was only one floor in the then fashionable Deco style. Stephen Thomas was the go-to architect for Charleston in the 1930s and the first to regularly undertake significant projects in the Uptown. His residential projects, such as 145 Moultrie Street, were typically colonial revival. However, his non-residential projects, including the A. Burnett Rhett School, now the eastern half of Burke High School, were decidedly less traditional and more Deco. While the building is simple, so were all the others in the area. This building's block was home to a Chinese laundry, grocery store, barber shop, and cafe in the 1930s. Only someone unfamiliar with King Street would use the far grander structures of Lower King Street, such as the Riviera Theater and Crest Building, as comparisons. The Crest Building, for instance, cost $165,000 in 1930. 609 King Street cost $13,600, or 92% less. I hope the BAR would not protect only the single best, most expensive buildings of a style. Moreover, the applicant is also wrong that the small commercial building is not in keeping with the size, scale, and mass of the area. Many Uptown commercial buildings were one story. 584, 585, 700, 708, and 17 King Street are all single-story 20th century commercial buildings on King Street, just between Cannon Street and the Crosstown Overpass. In 1944, there were more than a dozen single-story businesses on the same block. No evidence suggests that the building has been significantly altered. Even the report of Miss Jones, which missed both the construction date and architect, wrongly cites only a single work permit for adding a sign in 1935 to justify the baseless claim that, quote, several alterations were made to the new facade throughout the 1930s. As I discussed with Steve Ramos of LS3P 2 years ago, rather than demolishing the building, it should be incorporated into the plans. The only structural issue with the building is that it does not meet current building code, but neither does any historic building in Charleston. In 5 years, no replacement will either. The owner should first have decided to preserve the historic building and then had the architect design a building on the remaining lot. LS3P specializes in giant box buildings, but they should be expected to design a building for the lot they have, not demolish historic buildings to achieve the lot they want. Historically, there were many other commercial buildings on King Street between Columbus and Line Streets, but the newspaper demolished them in favor of a parking lot in the 1960s. This survivor should not join its neighbors in a landfill. Sincerely, Kevin R. Eberly. And there are footnotes that he's listed for those articles.
Okay, we'll incorporate them into the record. Thank you.
All right, and then the Charlie Smith letter. Let me make sure I've got, sorry, wrong one. Okay, this letter is from Charles W. Smith of 333 Wapier Road. Dear Chairman and members of the board, I'm writing today to request that the application for demolition of 609 to 613 King Street be denied, not only because it is a rare surviving example of urban Art Deco architecture in peninsular Charleston, but because its architect, Stephen Thomas, is important to Charleston's 20th century architecture, and he should likewise be recognized and valued. Demolition requests for Charleston single houses, the city's most common building form, are routinely denied by the city, regardless of the condition of the building. We literally have thousands of them in the city. Many of them have been closed, boarded up, and abandoned for decades and cannot even be safely entered. Yet Charleston protects them from demolition as it absolutely should. In contrast, the few remaining examples of urban Art Deco architecture in the city, exclusive of 609 to 613 King Street, can be counted on one hand. The Riviera Theater, the Crest Building, the Chase Furniture Building, the American Theater, and the Marchstink Building. All but the Marchstink Building are located on King Street. We do not have thousands of these buildings that survive in peninsular Charleston. We have about 6. This small one-story Art Deco storefront is located at the extreme southwest corner of a roughly 5-acre tract of land owned by the Evening Post Corporation. To incorporate this structure into the design of whatever building is ultimately approved for this 5-acre property would be ridiculously simple. If it were merely a shell of a single house, it would be valued and protected, but Art Deco architecture in the city of Charleston is not highly valued. To give you an idea of how little value has been given to this building by the owners, as well as by the taxing authorities over the years, this Stephen Thomas designed Art Deco building has not even been shown on the tax rolls as an improvement to the property since at least 2013. The applicant has apparently paid about $86 annually in taxes on this King Street commercial property for nearly a decade. The lot itself is valued for tax purposes at $3.5 million. I suspect that a fair market appraisal would at least show that there has been a building on the property since 1937 and that the land on which it sits is worth many millions of dollars. The building is valuable too and deserves protection. Art Deco architecture and architect Stephen Thomas deserve a place in our history. Please deny this demolition request and require the 609 to 613 King Street be incorporated into the redevelopment plans for this property. Sincerely, Charles W. Smith.
Thank you. I believe that gets us to our written comments. Is that correct, Mrs. Parrish?
That is correct.
All right, I'm going to proceed to read those as just FYI for any members of the public watching and for our board. I will read those portions of the comments that are pertinent and subject to BAR's purview. Anything that I don't read would be items that we would exclude, such as zoning and livability, which I believe most people understand, but I'm just stating it as a refresher. That being said, we will be moving through a number of comments, so please bear with me, board, staff, and public. We have a comment from Virginia Swift, 45 Sycamore Avenue. The existing historic Art Deco store fronts at 609 King Street should be incorporated into the new development for this section of Courier Square. So many historic and architectural resources have already been wiped clean from this area of town. By demolishing yet another, you would only be contributing further to the unacceptable habit of disregarding Black and immigrant community culture and history. More research and documentation should be done on these structures to preserve their histories and incorporate it into redevelopment of the site. Have a Jamie Ellis. I don't have an address for this, but I'll go ahead and read it, assuming this person is a resident of the city. I'm writing with concern of demolition of these lovely storefronts at Spring and King. I wish there was something we could do to save these instead of turning them into an apartment. The rest is not directly subject to our purview. Linda Raymond, 175 King Street. Save this charming Art Deco building. Lorraine Evans, 14 Beedens Alley. Enough is enough. We cannot continue to allow developers to destroy historically significant buildings on any major thoroughfare. I've been here for 85 years, and I am dedicated to preservation. Harlan Green, 32 Chapel Street. Commercial buildings slated for demolition is too important for the city of Charleston to lose. It suggests the scale of commercial buildings that historically stood in this area and is aesthetically pleasing and important. It housed an interesting array of small businesses in the past and can stand as a valiant holdout against mass commercialization of King Street and invite small merchants into the area. The mass of the proposed building is overpowering and obliterates neighborhood feel and historic associations in the area. The small commercial building, if retained, could calm the intrusion of the massive structure behind it and also offer commercial opportunities. I'm well acquainted with the past vibrancy of shop owners in this area. My father was a merchant in this building. Was a merchant in a building now destroyed in the next block south on the eastern side of the street. And the rest is not subject to our purview. Nicola Budsajev, please defer the decision to give more time to see about preserving the historical building versus demolishing the structure to make way for new development. The rest is not subject to our purview. Laurie Bix, 144 3rd Avenue, please defer this project for further study, incorporating the historic building into the plan and creating a design that better connects to its place on King Street. One-story commercial building was constructed circa 1937. It's one of the few examples of Art Deco architecture in the city. It's also the last remaining historic structure fronting King Street on this block, which was once an important center for African-American and immigrant communities in the 19th and 20th centuries. More research and documentation should be done on the cultural value of the building as well as the viability of preserving the building on the site. Lanny Kittrell, 1502 Ketch Court. Dear BARL, I encourage you to defer this request to demo 609 King and take the request to demo one of approximately 12 extant Art Deco buildings on this peninsula with caution, and after more research has occurred and discussion with the applicant have transpired. There have been several successful projects downtown that have incorporated historic buildings that retain and showcase historic fabric of Charleston. Please allow the knowledgeable staff and members of local preservation group to perform research to guide decisions and design so that we can retain our historic district. Jade Galecki, 87 Columbus Street. 609 King Street is a magnificent structure, one of the few displays of Art Deco in the downtown area. One of the reasons Art Deco was popularized is because of the modern, luxurious look it gave to buildings. During the Depression era, the style gave hope of social and architectural progress. Given the significance of this design and the age of the building, I wonder what we can do to preserve it, to see it torn down and replaced with another. That's not really pertinent. This building deserves to be restored and adapted to showcase the unique Deco style while also being a useful facility. Downtown Charleston does not need to remove history to expand. Preserving unique and historic buildings should be something to embrace. Lauren Lynn, number 9 Ponce de Leon. Please do not approve the demolition of 609 King Street. These Art Deco buildings are an important piece of our city's history. Caitlin Brewer, 45 Peachtree Street. I deeply support the development. Well, that's not really pertinent. I do not think that there's been enough research on how to preserve the historic building found at 609 King. King Street is a primary throughway to the city. We are giving the impression to our locals and tourists that history north of Broad is repeatedly unimportant. Our city is worthy of all of its history. I ask that you defer this approval. Whitney Hine, 1420 Shucker Circle. I'm writing to request a deferral of 609 King Street. How can we call ourselves a historic city if we're going to demolish one of the only standing Art Deco buildings in Charleston? I want to live in a place where people care about the preservation of our architecture. Please don't erase character and substance. We're one of the few that still exist. Darcy Newfield, 68 Bogart Street. I believe the BARL should defer the project to avoid demolition of the historic structure of this property. More research into both the history and the preservation of the building is needed, especially as it pertains to African American and immigrant communities for the 19th and 20th centuries. This building also contains architectural merit. It's one of the few examples of Art Deco in the city. Please defer the decision to demolish this building. Brittany Lavelle Tula. This is the last remaining storefront on a once thriving commercial sector of Jewish, Greek, Chinese, and Black merchants. This storefront at the time of its construction was one of nearly 30 that lined the street. Destroying the storefront would be against all that Charleston stood for in the past 100 years. Use it, celebrate it, and honor the history, bringing the section of King Street to life. Ms. Parrish, I'm going to skip down, and unless someone on my board strongly objects, we have a number of comments that were hard to bifurcate between items 5 and 6. I'm going to ask the board to bear with me while I do those that were kind of sitting on the bubble, seeing as they pertain to both, and it's probably relevant to have them now. The next comment is Brian Adams, 1227 Farrago Street. I strongly urge the committee to defer this project. It's one of the few Art Deco style buildings in Charleston that was once an important center for Black and immigrant people during the 19th and 20th centuries. More research must be done about preserving the cultural history amongst redevelopment of the site. Also, King Street is a hub for nightlife in Charleston. And I'm going to skip that, it's not pertinent. King Street is vibrant, it is ever changing. I think that's it. Kathleen Hodgson, 2220 Wando Lee Drive. As an Art Deco devotee, I've always loved that building. I'm also disturbed by the size of the proposed project. As someone whose family members were raised here, I remember when you could see the church steeples. The building is one of the last remaining historic structures fronting King Street for this block. The area is once an important center of African American and immigrant communities. The rest is really outside our purview, except to say, please defer this project. Robert Stockton, number 6 Montague Court. Raid demolition request. This is a documented historic building circa 1928. It should be retained if possible. Alternatively, the interesting Art Deco facade could be incorporated into the design for replacement building. The replacement design, this is a pastiche of historical references having little to do with Charleston architecturally. The design should be substantially simplified. The proposed height, scale, and mass of the project are of great concern, particularly the height. 71 Ash Street. Mr. William Shandle, 71 Ash Street. Eliminating another existing historic small structure will continue to permanently eradicate Upper King Street as it once was. Installation of a 7-story structure will compete with the one to its south side, and they will go ever higher. Site height, scale, mass is completely incompatible with the Elliott Borough neighborhood around this project. Teresa Owens, Chadbury Lane. The 1-story commercial building at the terminus of Columbus Street was constructed circa 1925. It's one of the few examples of Art Deco in the city. It is also the last remaining historic building fronting King Street on this block, which was once an important historic center for African American immigrant communities in the 19th and 20th centuries. More research and documentation needs to be done on the cultural history of this building as the viability of preserving and incorporating the redevelopment on the site. Please do not consider approval until further research or modification has been done. Nathaniel Walker, 904 Ashley Avenue. The Art Deco commercial building proposed for demolition for this strange project has a charming, historically significant facade that is worthy of preservation. Its piers and corners between the storefronts feature elegantly rendered geometric pylons evoking setback forms of classic Art Deco skyscrapers, which is a hallmark of the style and a testament to the intentions of its owners and designers. However humble the building may have been at the time, to summon urbane cosmopolitanism of the roaring 20s, the proportions are graceful and pleasant. Opening up the glass, restoring the facade with color and detail would add a great deal to the street and the city. Proposed project is too monumental, and a combination of the Orphan House, a Parisian palace, and a colonial Williamsburg barn. That sounds worse than it is because it is not dreadful. It could be less pompous, pulling back from the Customs House drawings more to the Art Deco aesthetic of the building that should be preserved and flank. And they could flank the northern side with hardscape courtyard with cafe tables and umbrellas. And Art Deco-esque, that's not pertinent. Jane Gillich, 49 Held Circle. I completely agree with Preservation Society comments. Items should be deferred. Julie Hill, 41 Fenwick Drive. More research should be done before a historic building is demolished. Ellen Harley, 23 Wentworth Street. This project needs to be deferred. There are many considerations that need to be studied before any action is taken on this project. The existing structure built in, I believe the author meant 1925, but it says 1825, has historic significance, and its possible integration into the new structure needs to be considered. While balconies are an amenity, consideration needs to be given to the urban landscape and visual effect on the neighborhood. Shannon Pytel, 318 Keesler Road. Everyone in the world loves Charleston. I would hate to see it lose historical charm and rich history. Please consider working with preservationists to keep King Street history. Emil Crossing, 152 Jupiter Lane. As this is one of the last remnants of Art Deco style in Charleston and the last storefronts owned by immigrant merchants, it should be saved. We should be focused on preserving the old buildings that are in fine condition. At the very least, the plan should be revised to incorporate the old with the new. Jane Tyler, 50 Rutledge Avenue. I believe approval for demolition of 609 King Street should be denied. The history and cultural significance of the existing Art Deco building must be studied fully before demolition is considered. Proposed replacement is too tall, too bulky, and not in keeping with the surrounding neighborhood. Allison Petrie, 172 Vango Drive. I strongly oppose demolishing an existing building just so another high-rise that does not fit the style of Charleston can be built. This project and others, it's not pertinent. Angela Colwell, 733 Gilmore Court. Stand with the Preservation Society of Charleston. I'm sending this comments to request that BARL defer this project to allow further study, incorporating the existing historic commercial building with a development plan for a lot and creating a design that better connects to the surrounding environment. The rest is not our subject, our purview. Evanitz, Devereaux Avenue. Does downtown Charleston need another high-rise to replace one of the examples of Art Deco architecture that we have? Perhaps some of the integrity and beauty which propelled Charleston to become a dynamic and historic city should remain as is. I'm saddened. Let's see. It's not really pertinent. I'm disappointed in the BAR's continual over-the-top input and control into residential living zones while turning a blind eye to approving demolition and subsequent development of buildings that would be more suited to cities with less historic influence. Tara Hawk, 76 Warren Street. I've always loved this little building, did not know its history and cultural backstory. I really hope you do not approve plans for its demolition. The building that is proposed to take its place does not seem to fit in the surrounding neighborhood. Please vote to defer until further research can be done. Rachel Donaldson, 918 Rutledge Avenue. While that's not really pertinent, I strongly oppose the construction project. Request BAR defer at the very least. Demolishing the existing structure would be very detrimental to the built environment of Upper King Street. One of the places that makes Charleston an attractive city is the variety of historical architecture. To lose an important piece of Art Deco architecture and replace it with something so different in massing and scale compared to what is there would further diminish architectural and historic integrity of the city. need to have a mix of old and new properties such that to sacrifice this last remaining historic structure on the block would mean severing all ties to the architecture and social history of this place. 15 Riverside, Manual, 15 Riverside Drive. Please do not demolish this building, and please defer this project to allow further study of incorporating the historic building into the plan and creating a design that better connects to its place on King Street and better contemplates how this will work with the proposed low line. Stephanie Wilson Gentile, 54 Queen Street. Please defer action on this project. Demolishing the only remaining building of the Art Deco era in Charleston should be carefully considered and rejected. The building is proposed has a resort feel and does not fit in with surrounding architecture on King Street. Building is too large, too massive, and a motor court seems out of keeping with the quote unquote vibe of Charleston. There's no need for an additional floor. Thank you for your consideration. David Shank, 5 Homel Place. I'm in full support of the proposed development on this property. Lynn Hanlon, 67 Meeting Street. Please defer this project for additional study to incorporate the 1925 building into an overall plan. The existing building is an important structure in what was a vibrant African American and immigrant business district. The new plan does not fit the neighborhood and does not merit an additional floor. It needs further study. Brian Matthias, 356 Ashley Avenue. As a resident of downtown, I'm against demolition of the structure and replacement. The rest is not pertinent. Cindy Wofford, 8 Elliott Street. As presented, the building facade is inappropriate for the King Street corridor. History of the building currently located on the property needs to be researched thoroughly prior to demolition. Please defer this vote until more information and conversations regarding a redesign can occur. Betty Breedlove, 85 Trad Street. Please don't demolish the structure at this location. I agree with the Preservation Society that this project needs to be further reviewed. Points made by Preservation Society are well stated. That's not really pertinent. I think this building could be incorporated into the new structure, this as a part of the entrance. How does the structure fit in the greater plan for Courier Square? I think these are many questions that should be answered before the historic building is destroyed forever. And those are again, about 10 comments that could be factored in 5 or 6 and try to keep it relevant to those parts to the demolition, which is our current agenda item. I believe that's it, Ms. Parrish. Have I missed anything?
I am sorry, I did have one that I did not put the text of the email for you, but I will read it right quickly. It is from Brian Thompson. It was an email. I don't believe this one came through, but it says, please do not allow the demolition of this very rare Art Deco building in the city of Charleston to make way for something grotesque. Thank you. And that concludes the public comment that we have.
Thank you so much. We will now move to city staff comments and recommendations.
Okay. So I'm going to start reading, but staff observations are, no one enjoys reviewing a demolition request, especially for one of a building that seems intact and salvageable. This has been a tough decision for staff, and we acknowledge that this may be a tough decision for the board. In reviewing an application for demolition, we reference Ordinance Section 54-240, Article B, which states, in reviewing an application to demolish or demolish in part or remove or alter the exterior architectural appearance of any existing structure, the Board of Architectural Review shall consider, among other things, the historic, architectural, and aesthetic features of such structure, the nature and character of the surrounding area, the historic or culturally important use of such structure, and the importance to the city. As a point of reference, historically, the board has voted to incorporate historic properties or parts thereof into the forthcoming larger project. All right, and we'll move to staff comments. 1, regarding the historic, architectural, and aesthetic features of the structure, the building is characterized with an Art Deco theme. This theme is represented as a front facade treatment only and is simple in nature. There are more refined examples within the city. It is unclear how much of the treatment is original and how much may have been added as part of a later alteration. Number 2, regarding the nature and character of the surrounding area, the existing is a single-story building in an area of multi-story buildings, and therefore this structure no longer represents the greater context. Its size and scale are out of character for this portion of King Street. Number 3, regarding any historic or culturally important use of this structure, the research within the historical report presented by the applicant indicates the businesses that occupied the building seem to be indicative of King Street businesses throughout the years. There is little information presented or uncovered at this time that can clearly illustrate any important cultural significance. The building is believed to have been designed by Charleston architect Stephen Thomas, yet his designs were typically colonial revivals. Additional research is needed to determine what, if any, cultural significance this building represents. And to interject, there's a lot of that. There's a lot within the last few hours flying around. And number 4, regarding the importance to the city, this property sits at the terminus of Columbus Street. The building does not evoke an axial view as is existent in many other locations through the district. Demolition would provide a positive opportunity to address the street terminus. And then the staff recommendation is deferral for further research into cultural significance and notability of the architect, as well as the unique style of this building on King Street and in Charleston.
Okay, thank you very much, Mrs. Parrish. Would the applicant like the opportunity to respond?
Yes,
It's a
I would.
5-minute response period.
Yes, thank you. I'll try to be brief. We only had 43 people say things. I'll try to just address the main ones. As for other buildings that have been incorporated into existing buildings or new projects, I would say that the Meeting Street examples are very different because it's a very different street, and where Meeting Street has thousands more cars per day, King Street has thousands more pedestrians per day, and thus the building has to respond to that. As far as all buildings in Charleston are historical, I think a public building that we would design has a very high bar to protect health, safety, and welfare. And that's something that we have to do. And most buildings that we design will meet the code for many, many years into the future. As for the conjecture about which are Art Deco facades, we created a list: 501 A and B King, 446 King, 484 King, 445 King, 414 King, 349 King, 343 King, 340 King, 309 King, 294, 281, 257 through 261, and 225 King. These are all right on King Street, and these were primarily infill buildings of a certain period, and they fit nicely in as nice 2-story buildings. There are 277 buildings on King Street. There are 10 1-story buildings. 10. Which end of King Street do we want to emulate? The northern end or the southern end? And how do we do that? I think the State Historic Preservation District that has been discussed, this is the first that we're hearing of it, and we would like to learn more about it. Our client isn't aware of it. He's a property owner, and it would have an effect on him. And that's something that we're glad to know. We want to do the right thing. And as to Stephen Thomas as architect, there were some folks on the rebuttal who indicated the age of the building as earlier than when Mr. Thomas had his business. And we do need to do more work. We thank Mr. Eberly for his research, and we would like to look into that some more. We do not, as a city or an architectural profession, want to out of hand dismiss simpler, less expensive old buildings. We just don't think this is the right place to do that. And as for Mr. Schwebler and Mr. Eberly, we do agree that the building is not currently falling down. And it should be noted that the current owner did not let it fall into disrepair to advance deterioration in an effort to make a better case for demolition. The things that we discussed already make that case. What we are saying is that every single component of this building has to be reinforced structurally at a great expense in an effort to save it. Roof framing, walls, facade panels, facade posts, glazing, framing, etc. Having to do this will render this a completely rebuilt modern interpretation of an old building. It will not be the old building anymore if we do that. We do not agree that this is notable or rare. There are other better examples of Art Deco. We feel like the board has granted many demolitions on some controversial with many opponents, and we know that this weighs heavily on you and on us and the city staff. We do feel that King Street deserves better buildings in the center of this district. However, in deference to all this discussion and information, specifically this new State Historic Preservation District, we agree to withdraw this application at this time and defer the voting component until we can gather more information and discuss with the city staff and the preservation organizations. We feel this will buy the time so that without a doubt, we can make a case that we all feel good about. In addition, we would like to hear your thoughts, if any, on what has been presented to you today so that we can take that into consideration. In addition, we would like to have the board review the agenda item number 6 as a non-voting courtesy review. We think since we are all here together and it is a complex program with a significant learning curve, it would been all of us, the staff, the board, the applicant, and the public to use this time to cover the project, learn about its goals and our basic approach to height, scale, mass, and architectural direction. We would simply make our presentation. If staff would like to make comments and the board would like to make comments or ask questions, I think it would inform both aspects of this application greatly, and your thoughts and feedback would be invaluable, and we would appreciate your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr. Gow, and I appreciate the civility and respect that you have shown, and listening to all the feedback you're getting. You've obviously done that this evening, and you are listening, and I understand that. We had discussed very briefly before the meeting had begun what to do with an advisory opinion or status, and at that time we did not have Mr. Matters with us. So unless someone on staff objects to it, I guess what I would ask is the opinion of my fellow board members of the propriety of being comfortable with doing an advisory process, and whether we wanted to speak to agenda item number 5, number 6, or both.
Mr. Chair, I will go first on that, if you would allow me.
Yes,
this
sir.
is James Matters. It's not in our purview to be an advisory board, nor to hear an agenda item that is not proceeding. So I do not think that that is a good position for us to take.
Okay. Other commentary.
I would add to that while a lot of people in the community and even city staff often want to see a replacement building proposal when judging a demolition request, we as a board can't. Our ordinance is written very specifically to exclude that, because we have to judge the building in question on its own merits, on its own terms. And we will introduce a process problem if we hear a presentation on the building that will replace this, before we hear and dispense with the question of whether the building that's there right now should be preserved.
Thank you, Mr. White. Further board comment?
This is Leon Scott. I'm in agreement with 2 previous board members' comment.
Any further comment?
Yes, sir. I'm sorry.
Same here. Same here. This is Luda. I support in agreement with the board comments.
Thank you,
right
Ms.
now.
Sobchak. Thank you, Mr. Minister. You have some follow-up? Yes, sir.
I do. I just want to thank everybody. This is the way that the system is supposed to work. To including Richard taking the proactive position to withdraw because he heard things that he was unaware of, whether it was archives and history or the architect or whatever it was. So thanks to everyone for their commitment to this process.
And so unless I hear otherwise from my board, I'm taking it as a position that we would not want to do an advisory opinion. Mr. Gow, I know that that may be difficult or frustrating, but I want you to, and I think you probably know this, I just want to make it patently clear and clarify as the lawyer on the board that I would not either want to set a precedent that causes additional problems with this project, nor would I want to create a precedent where the board is generally committed to doing advisory opinions. But what I would say and reassure you, and I believe you know from your vast experience with this, is that through city staff comments, it is going to be able to form up how each of these projects develop. But I do want to say that I agree with Mr. White that whether this building is demolished or not has to stand on its own merits, as difficult as that is, because I understand the nature of your project. So having said that, I think we would decline to provide you an advisory opinion without a vote, especially as I understand it that you have withdrawn these items from consideration. But I do appreciate you requesting us to at least consider that given your unique situation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
And Mrs. Parrish, I understand that item 5 regarding demolition has been withdrawn. I do not know if we're considering item 6 withdrawn, and so we can get a clarification from that from the applicant, Mr. Gow, or someone on behalf of the applicant to decide how to, with finality, if that item is withdrawn as well.
I believe he's been pulled out. I think that Ted is still on the call. And
Okay. Well, I was
there
saying,
you are. Okay, they're still here.
Okay.
So I think for finality's sake, there needs to be a motion to either withdraw number 6 or
that's what I was implying. Is that Mr. Gow or anyone else on behalf of the applicant, they've said they withdraw number 5. That's of course not an issue. I guess I believe a board member can make the motion to withdraw number 6, right? Or can
I don't think we need to make a motion to withdraw number 6. Number 6 can't be heard until number 5 is resolved.
Well, that's true. Okay. If everyone is satisfied that number 6 has been withdrawn by default as a result of number 5 being withdrawn voluntarily by the applicant, I'm okay with that as well.
I believe that's right also.
Okay.
I agree.
All right. And thank you again to the applicants, and we will work through this process. For any members of the public who are currently viewing this, understand that we, as you've heard here tonight, to the extent that your comments are relevant and within our purview, we are glad to hear from the public, and we appreciate your participation in the citizens' participation process. Mrs. Parrish, I believe that concludes all the items on our agenda for this evening.
that does conclude it.
All right. Fellow board members and staff, great to see you as always. Thank you for your hard work with these site visits yesterday and at other times. And again, I look forward to the time that we are able to return and meet in person again.
Indeed.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, board members.
Sorry, everybody.
Thank you all.
Have a good evening.
You too.
Thank you all.
Thank you.